Imagine living in one of the most beautiful countries in the world, surrounded by pristine beaches, vibrant cities, and a lifestyle envied by millions, but being unable to afford a place to call home. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is Australia in 2024, where a perfect storm of economic pressures, policy failures, and skyrocketing housing costs has left hard-working Australians struggling to survive. Welcome to the dark side of Australia. Housing and rental crisis. What if I told you that owning a home in Australia today is harder than at any point in the last 40 years? For young Australians, the dream of owning a home has become a nightmare. Australia is often seen as a paradise. Its world-class beaches, vibrant cities, and sprawling landscapes make it a global dream destination. But behind the postcard-perfect exterior lies a harsh reality. Owning or even renting a home in Australia is a near impossible feat for many. To put this into perspective, a family in Melbourne needs to earn at least $170,000 per year to buy a median-priced home. In Sydney, that number jumps to an eye-watering $260,000 per year. The problem? The median household income in both cities is only around $100,000. This creates a massive gap that leaves most Australians locked out of the housing market. Even outside the big cities, the crisis persists. Since 2020, house prices in Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth have surged by over 50%, while wages have only grown 12%. For young Australians, this has been devastating. Home ownership rates for people under 34 have plummeted by nearly 25%. Meanwhile, properties like a dilapidated Sydney home without power, a kitchen, or even a toilet still spark bidding wars and sell for $3.5 million. The desperation is palpable. But what about renting? Median rents in Sydney now exceed $3,000 per month, while Brisbane isn't far behind at $2,500. Renters face fierce competition, with dozens or even hundreds of applicants vying for the same property. The result? Australians are struggling to secure not just a home, but their dignity and peace of mind. Immigration. 740,000 immigrants in just 1 year. That's more than any other year in modern Australian history. But is immigration to blame for the housing crisis? From 2022 to 2023, Australia welcomed nearly 740,000 people, a staggering 200,000 more than pre-COVID levels. This sudden influx has had a profound impact on the housing market, especially for renters. Temporary visa holders, who make up the majority of immigrants, are overwhelmingly renters. In some suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne, rents have jumped by 18% in just 1 year due to soaring demand. However, blaming immigration alone is too simplistic. Historically, Australia's migration rates have been relatively consistent. The real issue lies in how Australia has failed to scale its housing supply alongside population growth. Since 1966, housing construction relative to population growth has been steadily declining, creating an ever-widening supply gap. Additionally, immigrants contribute to Australia's economy by filling labor shortages and driving growth in industries such as healthcare, education, and technology. The challenge lies in managing population growth responsibly by aligning housing policies with immigration trends. Not building enough homes. Australia's population is booming, but why aren't we building enough homes to keep up? The answer lies in a cultural paradox. Despite its vast open spaces, Australia's housing market is suffocating. In 2023, only 170,000 new dwellings were completed, the lowest number in a decade. Meanwhile, the country saw its largest spike in immigration in a generation. This supply-demand imbalance has fueled skyrocketing prices and rents. One of the core issues is Australia's cultural preference for suburban sprawl over urban densification. Cities like Sydney and Melbourne have population densities far below global counterparts like London or Munich. While low-density living is often idealized for families, it's become a major obstacle in addressing the housing crisis. To make matters worse, Australia has a severe NIMBY, not in my backyard problem. Long approval times and bureaucratic red tape have slowed housing development to a crawl. In New South Wales, it takes an average of 111 days to approve a single home development compared to less than a week in Texas. This resistance to development has created artificial land scarcity, driving up land prices and making it harder for young Australians to afford homes. The lack of public housing is another critical issue. Australia has one of the lowest rates of public and affordable housing among developed nations. While countries like Singapore have implemented large-scale public housing programs, Australia lags behind, leaving low-income families with few options. Tax incentives, negative gearing, supers, and capital gains. Australia has some of the most generous tax incentives for property investors in the world. But are these policies actually making the housing crisis worse? Negative gearing, a policy introduced in the 1930s, allows investors to offset rental property losses against their personal income. Combined with favorable tax treatments for real estate investments in retirement accounts, supers, and reduced capital gains taxes, this has created a perfect storm of incentives for speculation. The result? A system that heavily favors older Australians and property investors at the expense of young people and renters. Today, 50 to 80% of all investment properties are negatively geared, costing taxpayers $8 billion annually. These policies have turned housing into a speculative investment rather than a basic human need. Additionally, foreign investors play a significant role in driving up property prices. In 2022 alone, foreign buyers spent over $12 billion on Australian real estate, further exacerbating competition and pricing locals out of the market. Declining productivity and investment. What happens when a country focuses more on flipping houses than building businesses? A declining economy. Australia's obsession with real estate has come at a significant cost to its economy. With generous tax incentives encouraging investment in non-productive assets like housing, there's little motivation to invest in innovation or business growth. In 2022, Australia spent just 1.7% of its GDP on research and development, far below the OECD average of 2.4%. This lack of innovation has slowed productivity growth, with real GDP per capita stagnating over the last decade. Meanwhile, high income and corporate taxes have made Australia less attractive for businesses. Instead of fostering a dynamic economy, the country has doubled down on a system that disproportionately benefits landowners and speculators. At the same time, rising housing costs are putting immense financial pressure on families, reducing disposable income and limiting consumer spending. This has ripple effects across the broader economy, stifling growth and innovation. Social impacts of the housing crisis. The housing crisis isn't just about numbers, it's about lives. How is this crisis reshaping Australian society? The social impacts of the housing crisis are profound. Homelessness is on the rise, with over 120,000 Australians experiencing homelessness in 2023, a 13% increase from the previous year. Families are being forced to live in cars, couch surf, or stay in overcrowded housing arrangements. Mental health issues are also escalating. The stress of unaffordable housing, insecure rentals, and constant relocations is taking a toll on Australians' well-being. Studies show that housing insecurity is closely linked to anxiety, depression, and reduced life satisfaction. Additionally, intergenerational inequality is deepening. Younger Australians are increasingly reliant on their parents for financial support, creating a cycle of dependency and resentment. Meanwhile, older generations who benefited from decades of rising property values are now living comfortably off the wealth accumulated through real estate. Environmental concerns. What's the environmental cost of Australia's housing crisis? Urban sprawl, driven by the preference for low-density housing, has significant environmental consequences. Expanding suburbs encroach on natural habitats, reduce biodiversity, and increase carbon emissions due to longer commutes. In contrast, higher density housing in urban areas can reduce environmental impacts by promoting public transport use and preserving green spaces. However, Australia's slow adoption of sustainable building practices and energy-efficient homes means that many new developments are not environmentally friendly. Addressing the housing crisis requires integrating sustainability into housing policies and encouraging green building initiatives. Chapter 8: The Solution and Conclusion. Can Australia turn the tide on its housing crisis? The answer lies not just in acknowledging the problem, but in embracing bold, innovative, and collaborative solutions. The solution: fixing Australia's housing crisis is no small feat, but there are tangible steps that policymakers, businesses, and communities can take. It starts with understanding that housing is not just an economic asset, it's a human right and a cornerstone of societal well-being. 1. Addressing housing supply. The first and most urgent solution is to build more homes, quickly and strategically. Streamlining development approval processes, reducing bureaucratic red tape, and providing incentives for developers to build affordable and environmentally sustainable housing are key steps. Local councils need to collaborate with state and federal governments to fast-track developments in high-demand areas without compromising environmental protections or livability. Urban densification must be embraced, especially in cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Policies that encourage mid- and high-density developments near transport hubs, schools, and employment centers will not only alleviate housing shortages, but also reduce urban sprawl and its environmental impacts. Australia can look to global examples, such as Tokyo, where zoning reforms and high-density housing have kept home prices relatively stable despite population growth. Second, reforming tax incentives. Negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts must be reevaluated. Transitioning these policies to prioritize first home buyers and owner-occupiers over investors will help shift the market focus from speculation to housing accessibility. Introducing tax reforms that discourage hoarding of land or vacant properties could also free up supply. Superannuation funds should be incentivized to invest in affordable housing developments rather than high-end real estate. This would provide long-term, stable returns for retirees while addressing critical housing shortages. 3. Expanding public housing. Australia's public housing stock needs a dramatic overhaul. Large-scale investment in public and affordable housing, similar to Singapore's Housing and Development Board model, could provide secure homes for low- and middle-income Australians. This approach would require governments to view housing as essential infrastructure, on par with roads, hospitals, and schools. 4. Aligning immigration policies with housing goals. Immigration is vital for Australia's economy and cultural diversity, but it must be paired with housing policies that ensure adequate supply for both new and existing residents. Strategic planning, informed by population growth forecasts, can prevent future mismatches between housing demand and supply. 5. Tackling homelessness directly. Immediate action is needed to address homelessness, including emergency housing programs and wraparound services that provide mental health support, job training, and financial counseling. Housing first models, proven successful in countries like Finland, can help break the cycle of homelessness. 6. Embracing sustainability. New housing developments must integrate green building practices, energy efficiency, and renewable energy sources. Retrofitting existing homes to improve sustainability can also reduce long-term costs for residents and contribute to national emissions reduction targets. 7. Shifting public perception. Changing cultural attitudes toward urban living and housing density is essential. Governments and urban planners must educate the public about the benefits of well-designed, high-density housing, such as reduced commute times, greater community engagement, and better access to amenities. Conclusion: Australia's housing crisis didn't emerge overnight, and it won't be solved overnight either. It requires a united effort from policymakers, businesses, and citizens to reimagine what housing means for the nation. At its core, housing should be a source of stability and opportunity, not stress and exclusion. By implementing bold reforms, embracing sustainable practices, and prioritizing the needs of everyday Australians, the country can turn the tide on this crisis. The question isn't whether Australia can solve its housing crisis, it's whether we're willing to demand the changes that will make it happen. The future of Australia's economy, environment, and society depends on it.